Or right under the flight path.
I feel like you're like,
You said the other day that when I get on the microphone, I put on a voice.
no, you put on the body move.
Oh, okay. Like, you got me thinking why I did that. Oh, there we go.
All right.
Hello, Ross.
Trevor, hey.
Hey, what's up,
How's it
buddy?
going?
Can you hear me okay?
You're a little faint.
All right, we actually had to move our operation outside where we were at, lost all power. So we're working we're working on a portable setup right now in the parking lot.
Oh, no. Is now still a good time? Did you want to try to reschedule?
Well, to me, it makes it even more fun.
Hey, we know being scrappy. That's the podcast business.
Welcome to MyTruth on podcast. This is episode 1. I am your host, Trevor W. Heasley. A few years ago, I joined what I now believe to be a cult, and I left in a non-approved way. I have spent the time since trying to examine how I, or anybody, could fall for this. And that's what this podcast is about. We will be going down the rabbit hole together and trying to understand it as best we can. When I was in Scientology, I was on staff. So I was the guy at the train station trying to recruit everybody who walked by. One day I was designing a flyer for a seminar and I needed a Scientology logo. I did an image search, as you do. What I found instead was an advertisement for a podcast called Oh No, Ross and Carrie. Not only did they steal my logo, but they were using a photo of somebody that I knew from the church. I wrote a knowledge report. Basically, I turned them in. In my mind, I found the enemy. The reaction was not what I expected. I was called into ethics. That's where you go when you're in trouble. I was grilled heavily, and they demanded to know if I had ever listened to the Oh No, Ross and Carrie podcast, or if I know of anybody who had. They wanted to know all my experience with what they call black PR, or negative press. They asked many times over and over and over again, just in different ways. It was a nightmare. I had, at that point, never even thought of listening, but after the way they reacted, I thought, oh no, now I have to listen. What I found was two of the warmest, funniest, and most real hosts ever to grace my earhole. Not only did I end up listening, but much later, after many worldview-altering events, I would end up as a guest on their show. Shortly after, I was called back into ethics. And then, my career in the cult was over. Doing that interview allowed me to share my story. Now for that, I will be eternally thankful for both hosts of the Ross and Carrie Show. And that brings me to my guest. For me, this is a full circle moment. Somebody I'm proud to introduce, Mr. Ross Blocher.
Thank you so much, Trevor. That's awesome. I couldn't ask for a better introduction.
It took a little while to write, and I'm out of breath, but I got through it.
The only way out is through. For anybody who's still wondering, wait, what is this Ross and Carrie thing? So Carrie Poppy and myself, we are co-hosts of a podcast, and we're all about first-hand investigations. And so rather than just looking something up and giving the report from our online research or something like that, we want to go and join and get involved and ask questions and see what happens. And so we cover fringe religious groups, alternative medical treatments, spirituality. It was a super fun story behind how we got to meet you.
You were doing this series on Scientology, and I was really warned against listening to it, and I did. They had told me that you were a suppressive person, that you were out there to hate on the church, but when I actually listened to the episodes, they were actually kind of like sweet and warm up until the end when things started to get a little bit weird, and I don't really think any of that was your fault.
I'm glad to hear that because, we don't go in with the intention of, well, hopefully not of anything in particular. We want to just be kind of open and have the real experience and talk about it, just sort of describe it in great detail. It was a very long series. I know today you wanted to talk about cults and just what a cult is. I wish there was a single, simple definition that one could point to and just say, this is what a cult is, and then line it up against any group and say yay or nay. It's far more complicated than that. It's more of like a checklist, and then you just see how many boxes of this checklist you're hitting. I think any particular group could easily say, if you did have that checklist, they could point to one of those checkboxes and say, well, see, we don't do that. We didn't have you give us all your money, so we're not a cult. Or we don't have the central charismatic leader, so we are not a cult. But it's more complicated than that. And something you said kind of resonated with me.
What's that? You
said sort of, now I view my time as me having been in a cult. But of course, no one ever at the time in a cult, whatever group you want to call a cult, if you agree that it's a cult, no one in that group says, oh yeah, we're in a cult and that's great. No one willingly or gladly accepts that designation.
Absolutely. I did not think I was in a cult. In fact, I had people, like when I was at the train station trying to recruit people, I would actually have people tell me, hey, you're in a cult. They would yell at me, cult, cult, cult. I really had no idea what a cult was. And all them yelling at me did was just cement my feet further into the ground saying, yes, you're the enemy. My church is protecting me.
Right. Yeah. So it was even unhelpful for people to say that. So I guess just to start this conversation, I'll mention that, usually that's not a good way to start the conversation is to tell someone you're in a cult, because that's not going to have the intended effect. If anything, it's going to kind of put them on the defensive.
Do you think if you were to maybe sit them down and explain to them without accusing them of being in one, but explaining to them what a cult is, do you think that would be a helpful way to approach somebody you suspect of being in a cult?
Absolutely. And I think one nice thing about books and about podcasts, here we are, is that you can kind of listen to the thought process, follow along, make it your own without having anyone sort of pointing the finger at you and putting you on the spot saying, you're wrong. Instead, you get to internalize the process, make your own decisions, kind of walk through those steps yourself, and you get to be the one who makes the decision and own that knowledge, own that process and that information.
Scientology is really strict on, if you don't know a word, look the word up. And yeah. I've always been unclear as to what a cult is. And I actually took it a step further and I asked complete strangers, what is a cult? And nobody seemed to know what an actual cult was. It was just like a strange group, or a group praying to owls, or, just complete off the wall answers. So I thought I would go to the actual dictionary, the one approved, to figure out what the word means. So according to the Oxford Dictionary, a cult is a noun. It's a system of religious veneration and devotion directed towards a particular figure or object.
Okay.
A relatively small group of people having religious beliefs or practices regarded by others as strange or sinister.
Okay, we're getting warmer.
And that's really it as far as their approved dictionary.
Yeah.
In the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's a religion regarded as unorthodox, great devotion to a person, idea, object, movement, or work, the object of devotion, a usually small group of people characterized by such devotion as like a singer's cult of fans, or like a movie's cult following, a system for a cure of disease based on dogma set forth, blah, 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 blah. So there really is no clear definition of cult which says stay away.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And all those definitions are correct in their own domains. Like if we're talking about a cult classic, we could be talking about the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and no one thinks that, by going to the theater and singing that you're part of a cult. And of course, many people will point to the origin of the word cult. It comes from the same place as culture. Originally it didn't have the baggage that it does now. And then, others might try to kind of distinguish, like there's other terms, for example, like a high pressure group. That's another way of talking about what we would traditionally refer to as cults. For a while, people were trying to call it like a new religious movement, but not all cults are necessarily religious.
What would be the difference between a cult or a new religious movement?
Step back for a second. There's it kind of modify the maxim. Many people would say, like one man's religion is another man's cult. When I was growing up in a very evangelical Christian community, we would point at any other sufficiently different flavor of Christianity and call that a cult. Jehovah's Witnesses were a cult, and the Mormons were a cult. Even Catholicism, to many people in my upbringing, was considered a cult. And I think for a lot of people, they'll say, okay, well, if something is brand new, that can be a cult because it's so small and insular, and you still have the founder alive and present. And that can start hitting a lot more of those check boxes that we'll get into a bit. But not all new religious movements fit the other definitions of cult, and not all cults are religious movements. Some can be political, some can be tied to like martial arts or something like that. When
I looked into new religious movements, the names like Rastafarian, Wiccan, they came up a lot. And what I found the difference between a new religious movement or a cult was, does the group deceive you to join? Do they harass you when they leave? is their word infallible? Are they open to criticism? To me, that would be the difference between like a new religious movement or a cult.
Okay, so yes, now I think we're getting into the meat of it, which is kind of evaluating a group based on its actions, on its behaviors, even rather than just its stated beliefs. And I think that's how you start to really, truly judge it. And one of the earliest books on this that many people kind of go back to when thinking about how to define a cult is Thought Reform by Robert Lifton. It was a psychiatric study of brainwashing in China. And so he had kind of 8 categories of how cults or, thought reform movements would affect the minds of their followers. And I'll give the categories real quick, but you'll kind of see how the language on them is a little abstract by today's standards. Milieu or environment control, that was one of them. Mystical manipulation, demand for purity, cult of confession. That one might bring some thoughts to mind. A sacred science, loaded language. That's another one we should definitely get into. Doctrine over person, and dispensing of existence. So some of those are a little abstract there, but that was kind of like the first framework of what constitutes a cult's behaviors. The International Cultic Studies Association has a list on their website called Characteristics Associated with Cultic Groups. It's been revised. The latest version is by Michael Langoni. It says concerted efforts at influence and control lie at the core of cultic groups, programs, and relationships. Many members, former members, and supporters of cults are not fully aware of the extent to which members may have been manipulated, exploited, or even abused. And then they provide this list of various ways in which cults can operate. But it's not one where, again, if something's going to be a cult, it has to check every box. I thought maybe we could kind of run through these and talk about them.
Absolutely.
So the first one is that the group displays excessive, zealous, and unquestioning commitment to its leader, whether alive or dead, and regards his belief system, ideology, and practices as the truth, like capital T truth and law. So there we have kind of the role of like a leader, usually one person, maybe sometimes a few, but usually one person, usually the founder, who inspires reverence.
That's like comparable to totalitarianism.
Right. And so you can see this in political movements where you have the dear leader's picture everywhere. And I've seen it in religious groups as well. Like every room you walk into has a different picture of that person, or you're constantly being exposed to their recordings, or maybe like the only books you can buy that are approved are by that one person.
I can relate to that kind of group.
And, many people could point to Christianity and say, well, look, Jesus is everywhere. And you're constantly talking about what he said. Well, yeah, absolutely. And, it's not the only thing it's not the only item in the checklist, but it's something that you should pay attention to and be aware of. If you are seeing that one person more than anybody else and they're being just so venerated, you should start asking yourself, well, wait a second, why is that?
Yes.
The next item is questioning, doubt, and dissent are discouraged or even punished.
So what you're saying there is that they're not open to being reasonable or having their beliefs questioned, or they're not willing to reconsider.
Right. And so there's various tools that are used to have you consider outside thought dangerous, or maybe satanic or evil, or just, making you feel super guilty about being unfaithful, or asking even inside your mind questions. Your thought process should be sacred, right? But sometimes they'll kind of even instill thought-stopping cliches, thought-stopping ideas in your head to make you feel bad for even asking those questions.
Yeah, I had asked a lot of questions when I was in my group, and a lot of them was just that the response was, what was wrong with me for even questioning or thinking like that? Why, like, what is going on in my life that I would even doubt that what he was saying.
So rather than addressing your question, it would turn back on you. What's wrong with you, Trevor?
Correct. And then you just keep reading it and reading it and reading it and reading it until you agree with it. And if you don't agree with it, then you're reading it wrong, and you need to get out the dictionary, re-examine all the words until you agree with it.
Okay. Yep. All right. Well, that's another checkbox we hit there. The next one is mind-altering practices such as meditation, chanting, speaking in tongues, denunciation sessions, debilitating work routines are used in excess and serve to suppress doubts about the group and its leaders.
What is a denunciation session?
Denunciation sessions, they give away traitors. They like call out people who haven't been fully faithful. Like so-and-so, I saw her saying something bad about the dear leader.
Hold on. I got to get out my pen and write another check into the box of my group.
And also it mentioned things like speaking in tongues. I did that once when I was a Christian, and it was very much, now that I've had more religious experience, now I kind of recognize it as me having been repeating a mantra. And, it wasn't, Om or Om Mani Padme Hum or something like that. Instead, it was me saying, I love you, Jesus. I love you, Jesus. But to the point where I got lightheaded. And then when pushed, I fell over and I was speaking in tongues. So, these things that almost kind of border on the sensation of a supernatural experience can also kind of fall within that category. But they also mentioned difficult work routines. And I think maybe you might be familiar with some of that in your experience.
Yes, I remember those 16, 18-hour work days on your feet. Good times, good times. And I think that was mainly designed just to keep me tired. It was designed to keep me from questioning. Like if I was fully awake, I was going to have questions. If I was absolutely exhausted and tired, my only interest is just getting done with my day.
Yeah, you've just constantly got to be busy, working, trying to achieve an unrealistic performance goal. Yeah, that definitely seems to fit. Another one of the checklist items is the leadership dictates, sometimes in great detail, how members should think, act, and feel. For example, members must get permission to date, change jobs, marry, or leaders prescribe what types of clothes to wear, where to live, whether or not to have children, or how to discipline children, and so on.
I can see a lot of Christianity in that also. I could see a lot of Scientology in that, a lot of different religions, the way they dress and things that are expected of their members as far as discipline.
Right. And all of this is kind of a spectrum. So, maybe you choose to marry somebody who's not of your faith. And I know within Christianity, you would have had, at least in my church, you would have had a lot of people who would have been saying, oh, are you sure you should be doing that? You should really pray about that. You should be avoiding someone who's not a fellow Christian. You should not be unequally yoked. But no one would come down, no authority figure would kind of put their foot down and say, you cannot marry this person. But in other groups, that does happen, even within Christianity, some groups.
I have a board operator in here named Jay. And his little hand just popped up. He has a question. Okay. Hold on one second. He's been listening in the whole time.
Have you ever heard of LA Church of Christ?
LA Church of Christ. I'm familiar with the Church of Christ generally.
And there's a lot of them, right?
Yes.
I was a part of that when I was younger. And what you're talking about, I was trying to find Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
These guys found me and they brought me in their home and I had to live with them and I had to be with them all the time. And I was just like, I got to go work and stuff. And they were just like, they were like, no, you are a disciple. Yeah, they'd be like, you're a disciple and you must live your life like a disciple at all times. And have you heard anything about that church?
Yeah. In fact, I had a friend who was raised in that church and is very much glad to be out. She said it was incredibly controlling just in that area we were just talking about in terms of what you wear and who you can associate with.
Jay is one of those guys who was telling me a while ago, there's no way I would fall for a cult. Got to be kind of dumb to do that. You're telling me that Jay may have been in a cult.
Right.
His excuse, he was 19, I was 40 when I entered mine. Fair enough.
We'll come back to it, but to step away from the checklist for a bit.
Sure.
That's another important thing is recruitment. You never start with the more extreme beliefs or practices. You start with what's called love bombing, where someone new shows up off the street and you let them know like, oh, you're welcome here. We're so glad to have you. You're so smart and attractive and we've got things for you to do. Here's the social engagement hour. And we want you to, what are you doing on Tuesday? Let's make sure we get you here on Tuesday and we're going to serve you food. And, just all of these nice people who care about you, who are surrounding you and become kind of all consuming in your life. why.
I know you can't hear me, but I'm shaking my head violently. Yes.
Yeah, okay. But that's how you do it. And then over time you introduce little pieces of information like, oh, by the way, we believe that your bodies are not the actual you. There's actually a different definition of you, which in that original thought reform book that would have fallen under the dispensing of existence category. But something like that. But then only later on, once you've maybe paid a bunch of money to the group and you've made a lot of important bonds, maybe even familial bonds, that's when you start to learn some of these more advanced, higher level things. And oftentimes that's an element as well as keeping certain information sort of secret, and it only gets delivered to you later on once you're already involved and have skin in the game.
And they defend it by saying, if you find out this information too early, you're going to harm yourself, or harm can come to you. We're lying to you to protect you.
Yes, because you can't just tell people like, oh, don't worry about this information, we'll give to you later. You need a disincentive so they don't try to look it up on their own, especially in the age of the internet. The internet can be both a tool and also a danger to insular groups because it allows people to look outside and talk to others. And that's exactly what they don't want you doing. They want to control your milieu, the people that you're speaking with.
And it's funny because that's exactly what I want to do right now. I want to reach out and I want to talk to others and I want to get their stories and I want to compare notes. I want to learn as much as I can about other people's experience so that I know that I am not alone. And I think by doing that and finding out that I'm not alone, maybe we can help people figure out that they're not alone also.
Right. I think that's good and healthy. And anytime you have voices around you telling you not to speak to other people, that should be a red flag, something that should give you pause.
That was the number one red flag for me when they told me, don't listen to your show. I wanted to know why. I'm the kind of person, if you say, don't do this, unless it's like, don't touch this fire, then I want to know why I'm not allowed to.
Yeah, that's a good impulse.
If I was in the Star Wars universe, I'd be a gray Jedi. I would want to know everything about the dark side, but maybe not follow them completely through.
Nice. All right, returning to the checklist, the next one on the International Cultic Studies Association list is the group is elitist, claiming a special exalted status for itself, its leaders, and its members. For example, the leader is considered the Messiah, a special being, an avatar, or the group and the leader are on a special mission to save humanity. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all.
Not only were they saving humanity, but the universe as a whole.
Right. When it comes to, say, the leader, if they're still alive, then they're beyond reproach. You can never, if they say something wildly different, well, then it's your job now to reconcile what they said before with what they're saying now. Also, another thing that I've noticed is kind of a common thread in cults is that the leaders themselves don't have to follow the same rules that they give everybody else. You'll see them maybe have these strict rules for sexuality for everybody below them, but then they'll have sex with whoever they want.
And I don't have any proof, but from what I hear, that was a problem with my guy as well.
Interesting. Okay. And every founder, every leader is different, and oftentimes the cult will kind of reflect those individualities. So sometimes the cult is kind of geared around getting wealth or fame or sex or power for that cult leader. And it can be any combination of the above. All right. So the next item on the list is the group has a polarized us versus them mentality, which may cause conflict with the wider society. So painting everybody else as a them, the outside, the deluded masses, the sheeple, however you want to say that.
And do those sides ever mix? I mean, like, let's say I'm in one of these groups and I have a friend that's not. Like, for the most part, the cult would say, hey, maybe it's best you don't hang out with that person. Or dare I say, disconnect from them.
Yeah, because they want you to see everybody else as the enemy. This was an interesting insight that I saw a while back, and that was about the idea of proselytizing, kind of going out there and preaching to others, maybe even standing on the side of the street and passing out flyers or trying to recruit people or going door to door. That oftentimes that isn't so much geared for recruiting new members, so much as giving the people assigned to go out and recruit new members, giving them this sense of alienation. And so as they're having to say these awkward pitches or, like give people a literature they don't want or tests they don't want or what have you, that by being rejected constantly, that they are all the more going to draw within themselves and the group and say, well, this is my only family. These are the only people who understand me.
You just blew my mind. I didn't even realize that was happening to me at the time. But looking back now, yeah, I can absolutely see how that would be very, very effective, because it was my group trying to recruit the others. And the more they said no, the more I was like, well, you guys are wrong. Why would you not want to partake in this amazing thing?
Yeah. And that was a mind blower for me too.
Really put up a wall between me and the public.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I don't know even how much that has to be by design, but it has the intended effect. The next checkbox is that the leader is not accountable to any authorities. And I think we've kind of talked about that.
Yes.
Just that the leader is not guilty of crimes that the leader may commit. We see this in groups like the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints, Warren Jeffs. He would marry these underage girls and do all kinds of horrible things. But, that was all okay because he was chosen by God.
It was under the guise of religion.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And, who are you to question religion? Oh, are you questioning us? Well, you're just a religious bigot. That's the defense.
That is a very popular defense with them, too. You criticize, you're a bigot. Disagree with me, you're a hate crime.
Right. That's kind of meant to stop the conversation and sort of hide under that shield of religion. The next checklist item is kind of related. The group teaches or implies that its supposedly exalted ends justify whatever means it deems necessary. This may result in members as participating in behaviors or activities that they would have considered reprehensible or unethical before they joined the group. For example, lying to family or friends or collecting money for bogus charities. All of that is okay because, we're lying for Jesus.
I can harm you as long as it's for the greater good for us.
Yeah. And so that might be kind of like a fair game type policy where, hey, it's okay to harass and intimidate people because, well, they're enemies of the church, so they have it coming.
I definitely see that in play. It still, to this day, blows my mind that a church could be involved in anything like the fair game policy. I mean, churches, from what I would like, would be places you could go to be safe. It's absolutely insane that there is a church out there that has intent to do anybody harm.
Right. I think I see this in maybe some modern political movements.
Oh, yeah.
But, as soon as you start excusing bad behavior that you would, if the other side did it as well, you would point the finger at. And if your only defense is pointing the finger, then you should really question that as well.
My group, a lot of the times when you were wrong or harm would come to you, it was nothing that somebody from within the organization did to you. It is something that you did a while ago, and this is karma. It's not the church harming you. It's karma.
Yes.
It's something you did a long time ago, be it this life, maybe a past life. But it's your fault. Everything bad that happens to you is your fault.
Oh, my goodness. Well, A, yes, that's incredibly insightful. And B, you totally anticipated the next checkbox, which is the leadership induces feelings of shame and or guilt in order to influence and or control members. Often this is done through peer pressure and subtle forms of persuasion. So, what you're describing is just one way that if anyone starts to talk about the things that are making them feel uncomfortable or how they feel that maybe they're not being well served or treated, then like you're saying, they may point to like a metaphysical thing and say, aha, well, you did something bad in your past life and now you need to figure out what that is and report on yourself.
Right. You're feeling this way about us because there was a thought you had or something you did against us that's making you feel this way.
Right. It's like, but wait, you still committed that horrible crime. Aren't you going to explain that? No, we're turning it back on
to what you
Trevor.
did.
You are the one who has to explain this. People joke about this in Catholicism all the time that, we're the best at guilt. There's all these, things in your mind that you carry where you're constantly worried about your own salvation or purity or holiness. Okay, so the next one is subservience to the leader or group requires members to cut ties with family and friends and to radically alter the personal goals and activities they had before they joined the group. So you may come in, kind of thinking that you want a certain career, and instead you may end up just working for the church instead. They'll say, you want to be a writer? Why don't you use those writing goals to help the church? Or, oh, you're a great artist, why don't you draw for us? And then, of course, the cutting ties with family and friends, or even asking questions about your family and friends and what do they believe? And let's examine them. And if we, the church or the group, do not approve of them, then we do not approve of you communicating with them.
It almost sounds like a prison instead of a group.
And it doesn't even need to require bars to keep people in. The bars can be purely psychological or elements of peer pressure. And I know, for example, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they have a practice called disfellowshipping. And it's that idea where if you choose to leave, you know that no one in your family is going to talk to you anymore. And so that's a huge pressure on you. Well, maybe I have these doubts, but I'm going to keep them to myself because I want to maintain my family relationship.
It is powerful. Your family is really a source of emotional security, emotional support, sometimes financial security. When you cut somebody off from the group, sometimes you're also cutting them off from all that. And that is another way to isolate them when they go. You have nobody, you have nothing. So what's worse? Nobody and nothing, depression, possible falling into drugs, suicide, or just continuing along with the group.
Right. And how many people stay in just because of that?
I did for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that's a rational calculation too, because what if I lose my living place? What if I lose my job? What's going to be my fallback? And if that network is your friends, your family, and by extension, even the group itself, you're going to be less inclined to honestly question it. So the next checkbox is the group is preoccupied with bringing in new members.
Yes.
So there's just a lot of effort placed on recruitment, advertising. Many different cultic groups own publishing wings. I think of the Tony Alamo Ministries cult. They're a scary bunch. And, they had their own press, and they would constantly be printing out leaflets and leaving them under everybody's windshield. A lot of effort on recruitment.
Unfortunately, it works.
Yeah.
There's always going to be somebody out there who is broken up with their girlfriend, maybe had a fight with their family. They're feeling alone in the world. They're depressed. They're looking for a place of belonging. And someone's going to reach out their hand and say, come with me, brother. I have a group, which is going to, like what you said, love bomb on them. And then they're going to be like, I am home. I have a place. And that, I think, is where they get a lot of their members from, is here is a group that you now belong.
Right.
Or at least you feel you do.
Speaking of the Tony Alamo Ministries, one thing that they would do is they would serve free food, and they would even provide housing for people who didn't have it. And so they would bring in a lot of people from the streets, even from Hollywood Boulevard, and drive them up to the compound. And now you're there and you're getting fed and you've got a place to stay, but you're also separated from everybody else now. Yeah. So that was a means of recruitment. But what you were saying also reminded me of the practice of finding someone's ruin, actually trying to get them to tell you some of their worst past memories, weaknesses, personal failings, or have them fill out a test and then using that as kind of a tool to expose their weaknesses, and then saying, well, we can help you with that weakness.
No matter what your problem is, the solution is contained in this book, no matter what.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And, maybe we've got 8 separate classes that, can help guide you toward, whatever your particular lacking is, whether it be in relationships or in work or whatever, we have that for you and we can provide it. But all of those beginning stages will eventually guide you towards the same track as everybody else.
Yes.
The next checklist item is the group is preoccupied with making money.
That could be said. I mean, I don't know about the preoccupied part, but that could be said about most religious movements. I mean, they've got to eat, they've got to be able to build a building to do their services inside, or, pay the pastor. So, I mean, I understand accepting some money, but like when that's the preoccupation, the most important thing, that might be a problem.
Yeah, Right. And of course, preoccupied, that's a bit of an abstraction, a bit of a subjective measure. But yeah, you can look at, and this might take a little more knowledge than one can have just from the viewpoint of a beginner with the group. But if you start to learn more about the financials and ask questions about where the money is going, I supported this charity. Can you tell me how you actually use the money? Can you give me accountability? Can you show me your statements about how much the leaders are earning? The more that gets kind of shrouded and hidden, And the more constant the money asks become, whether or not they're tied to an actual service or not, that should be another red flag. If you learn that the people working for the church are not being paid, okay, well, it's volunteer work. What are they getting in? What are they getting in remuneration otherwise, other than cash? Or do they live normal, healthy lives outside of the church? Do they have sustaining jobs? Like, those are all questions that you should kind of take into the mix. But if you have a workforce that's doing backbreaking work and not getting sufficient money for it, then you have to ask, well, where is all that money that's going to the church actually going?
I could see where that would absolutely be a concern.
Something to be aware of. It's, again, not the only, no one of these is like just the be all end all. But as you start stacking these up, you have to worry.
If you're preoccupied about money, then you don't have room left to be worried about your people. Once money becomes more important than the people, to me, that's a huge red flag.
That's a good point. Yeah, there's kind of a zero-sum game of concern. Of course, you can be concerned about multiple causes. You can be active in multiple causes. Just because you care about animal rights doesn't mean you can't care about, the vote or something like that. But you're right in that if you're spending all of your time recruiting and getting money, that's going to rob time from other crucial efforts. And you should look at how the balance is working out in terms of efforts. So much work has been done on this by various groups and experts. I mentioned the ICSA, and I've got 3 more checklist items I'll walk you through. But, also Steve Hassan has been another great resource for me. Yeah, he was a former Mooney, Unification Church, founded by Reverend Sun Young Moon. He has another model with even more checkboxes, but it's called the BITE model. And it looks at behavior control, that's the B, information control, thought control, and emotional control. Kind of a similar list of ways that a high pressure group might apply pressure on you. Okay, so 3 more. Members are expected to devote inordinate amounts of time to the group and group related activities.
Yes.
So that's just use of time as a resource.
If you're spending all your time doing stuff for the church or for the cult, you're not thinking about other things.
Yeah, it's a zero-sum game. We only have so many hours in a day. And then this one, I think we've already talked about. Members are encouraged or required to live and or socialize only with other group members. So we've sort of talked about that, the sort of corralling of the social group milieu.
The group I was with actually encouraged you to associate with non-members from outside the group, but it was mainly with the intent of bringing them in. So like you can have your friends, but try to steer your conversation towards how awesome this group is.
Did you ever have to abandon a friendship because of that, because they weren't sufficiently receptive?
More than once.
Oh, wow.
You go back and you apologize and you tell them what you were going through, but by then the damage is done. You betrayed them. And at that point, you're not really trusted as a friend anymore. You really do lose a lot of friends when you go in, and you make friends when you're in, but you lose them all when you go out. It's a scary thought for a lot of people who do want to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. The final item on the list was the most loyal members, the true believers, feel there can be no life outside the context of the group. They believe there is no other way to be and often fear reprisals to themselves or others if they leave or even consider leaving the group. We've talked about different aspects of that, but that could also include things like knowledge reports on other people, where you're like keeping tabs on them. And if they say anything to you that sounds critical, you have to report it. That's another warning sign.
Well, let's say you were in the group with me and I saw you do something what they would refer to as out ethics. I would have to report you, because if somebody else reported you and let them know that I saw you do it and I didn't report you, I'm just as guilty of doing the thing that you did.
Right. So even if you don't report on them, well, then someone else may report on them, and then you by extension, now you're just as guilty.
Just as guilty. Is there anything positive about being involved in a cult? Is there anything good about cults?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned earlier the term destructive cult, and that's used by Steve Hassan and others to specifically refer to a group that is hurting its members. It's actually harming their lives. I would say, on the the gradual slope, there we go, the continuum gradation that leads from just a normal social group to a cult, there's a continuum there. There's many different transitional phases in between, and all of them are going to be providing some of those benefits of just having a group, a social group. You've got people who know your name, who care about you, who are going to ask questions if you're not around and come looking for you. All of that is definitely important. You've got things to study and learn and ways to get involved outside of just your normal day job, to get out and do volunteer work. So in as much as your group, even if it is a cult, is providing some of those things, those can be positives.
You've done a lot of research into cults. What, as far as any part of group that you have joined for your podcast, what has been the number one most helpful thing you have been able to take away from any one of your investigations? Oh, man. Okay. That's a big question, because there's lots of them. I mean, this wasn't even a cult, but I think of the group that we joined that was doing laughter yoga. It was a bunch of adults finding excuses to just start laughing, even if they had nothing to laugh about at the moment, but it would turn into real laughter. And that was awesome. They would have groups where they called each other. That's an adorable group. That is absolutely adorable. I want to pinch them all on the cheek.
Yeah. Totally delightful. I've got to say, from my experience with Scientology, I like the ARC triangle. I think it's a useful concept. I even use it in conversation sometimes.
That would have been my answer too.
I think there is a relationship between affinity, which I really like how they define that, your desire to be close to someone or something, and your communication and your shared reality. I think that's actually like a helpful concept in our political milieu right now. We could use a little more shared reality and affinity.
You believe that by losing communication with somebody, you're going to lose your reality of them, your affinity for them, and that each one of them does affect the other.
Yeah.
In my world, it absolutely works.
I agree. I'm trying to think. In hypnotherapy, we found like a lot of good, just kind of methods of reminding yourself of your goals and being mindful of those goals, whether it be to give up a harmful practice like, smoking or nail biting or something like that. It won't cure you of cancer. But as long as you're trying to do things that are actually achievable, I think the hypnotherapy methods can be helpful. That's another one that we came away with after our investigation.
Bottom line, if you're in a group which is controlling you, telling you who to be friends with, who you are, and that the leader is infallible, what he says goes no matter what, that would be a harmful group. Now,
yes.
A group which is open to reason, which is open to consideration of new ideas, that might be a positive group.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I'm definitely not speaking out against groups in general. It's important to have fellowship, to have a social network, people who care about you, people you can talk to and confide in, but just constantly be asking yourself those questions like, am I worried that if I confide in someone that they're going to rat me out, especially for things that aren't bad? Ask yourself, if I left, would there be consequences? Am I free to leave anytime I want? And if not, why not? You should be able to have fellowship in your life and all of those good things. We mentioned that, there's good takeaways. Like, looking up a word you don't know in the dictionary, that's a good practice. You should do that.
If I don't know a word, it drives me nuts now. I've got to know what it means.
That's great. But you can have all of those good things without those other high pressure tactics. Take the good. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But sometimes get rid of the bathwater.
Never the baby, though.
Yeah, never the baby. Keep the baby.
We're going to draw towards an end here. I've been listening to your newest series, and you are becoming an exorcist, or you have become an exorcist.
Yes.
From hearing my voice tonight, are there any volcano alien demons that are in my body that you can hear?
I have not detected any Beelzebub, any Jezebel, or any negative Thetans.
Oh, so I am clear. I don't need the exorcist.
You don't, but if you do, you know where to go.
I do.